The vibrant green fence, a living tapestry of ivy and jasmine, shimmered under the afternoon sun. Years of careful cultivation, a haven of peace. Then, the guttural roar of chainsaws tore through the tranquility, followed by the chilling crack of splintering wood. A woman, sharp-faced and unyielding, watched, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She called it an eyesore. He called it his life's work. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But some dishes are forged from pure, unyielding concrete. Ethan had poured more than just water into his living fence. He'd poured his soul. For a decade, the meticulously trained ivy and blossoming jasmine had ascended the sturdy, discreet trellises, transforming the bare chain-link barrier between his property and the common area into a vibrant, verdant wall. It was a masterpiece, a testament to patience and a deep love for nature. Every morning, with his first cup of coffee, he'd walk the perimeter, admiring the new tendrils, the burst of white and purple blossoms, the diligent hum of bees. It wasn't just a fence. It was a sanctuary, a living shield against the creeping uniformity of suburban life, and a quiet rebellion against the stark, pre-approved palettes of the Cypress Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Then Brenda moved in. She arrived like a perfectly coiffed, meticulously manicured storm. Her house, the pristine white colonial directly across the cul-de-sac from Ethan's charming, slightly more bohemian abode, gleamed with an almost sterile intensity. Within weeks, the whispers started. New rules proposed at HOA meetings, fines levied for unweeded flower beds, mailboxes not conforming to the approved shade of taupe. Brenda, it turned out, had swiftly ascended to the role of HOA board president, her campaign platform built on a zealous commitment to restoring order and aesthetic integrity to Cypress Creek. Ethan, a man who preferred the company of his plants, to the drama of community politics, had initially dismissed it as typical neighborhood churn. He couldn't have been more wrong. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked neatly into his mailbox, heavy cream-colored stationery, the HOA logo embossed in a tasteful yet unsettling gold. It wasn't a friendly reminder, it was a formal notice. Subject: immediate action required, violation of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs. Article 4, Section 2B, unauthorized landscape. Barrier deer, Mr. Thorne. It has come to the attention of the Cypress Creek Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors that your property, located at 14 Willow Creek Drive, is in violation of the aforementioned CC&Rs due to an unapproved and overgrown vegetation. Barrier bordering the common area. This barrier significantly deviates from the community's established aesthetic guidelines and poses potential maintenance challenges for the association. You are hereby requested to remove said vegetation barrier within 14 days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in a daily fine of $50 and potential forced removal at the homeowner's expense. Sincerely, Brenda Albright, President, Cypress Creek Estates HOA Board. Ethan stared at the letter, his coffee growing cold in his hand. Unauthorized, he muttered, the word tasting like ash. He had the original approval, signed by the then HOA president, Harold Jenkins, from 10 years ago. It detailed the type of plants, the trellises, even the intended height. He rummaged through old files, pulling out the laminated document. He called the HOA office, expecting a quick resolution. He got Brenda. "Mr. Thorne," her voice was crisp, devoid of any warmth. "I'm intimately familiar with your file. The previous board's approval was, shall we say, a significant oversight. Our current CC&Rs are quite explicit. No permanent structures or plantings that obscure the view of the common areas without explicit current board approval. But it's not a permanent structure," Ethan argued, trying to keep his voice level. "It's plants. And it was approved 10 years ago. It's been here for a decade. Times change, Mr. Thorne. Boards change, and policies evolve. The current board interprets permanent structures to include any non-native, non-conforming, or aggressively growing vegetation barrier that alters the agreed-upon community aesthetic. Your ivy, while charming to some, has become a substantial visual obstruction. A visual obstruction? It's a green fence. It adds beauty. Ethan felt a vein throb in his temple. Beauty is subjective, Mr. Thorne. Compliance is not. You have 14 days. The line went dead. Days turned into a week. Ethan tried to rally neighbors. Mrs. Henderson, whose prize-winning roses had just been declared overly fragrant by Brenda, just wrung her hands. She's a force, Ethan. Just do what she says. It's not worth the trouble. Mr. Davies, a retired accountant who usually railed against any HOA overreach, just shrugged. Can't fight City Hall, son. Or in this case, the HOA president with too much time on her hands. A second letter arrived, this one with a bold, red, final notice stamped across the top. The tone was harsher, the threat of fines more immediate, the mention of forced removal more explicit. Ethan felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He loved that fence. He'd watched birds nest in it, lizards sun themselves on its leaves. It was his green heart in a world of beige. He went to the next HOA meeting, armed with his original approval, photos of his fence blending seamlessly with the landscape, even a petition signed by a few sympathetic, albeit timid, neighbors. Brenda, seated regally at the head of the table, cut him off before he could even finish his opening statement. Mr. Thorne, this matter has been thoroughly reviewed. The previous approval is null and void under the current CCNRs. The board has voted unanimously to uphold the decision. The removal date is set for this Friday. Any further disruption will result in additional penalties. Her eyes, cold and unwavering, met his across the polished table. There was no room for debate, no sliver of empathy. It was pure, unadulterated power. Friday dawned gray and heavy. Ethan woke before the sun, feeling a profound sense of dread. He walked his fence one last time, touching the rough bark of the older ivy stems, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of jasmine. It felt like a eulogy. At precisely 8 a.m., a flatbed truck rumbled down the cul-de-sac, followed by a smaller pickup, towing a chipper. A crew of 3 men dressed in orange vests emerged. They moved with a detached efficiency, their faces impassive. Brenda Albright stood on her impeccably manicured lawn, a few houses down, sipping from a delicate teacup, her gaze fixed on Ethan's property. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. Ethan watched from his living room window, his hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. The whine of chainsaws started, a horrific mechanical shriek that tore not just through the plants, but through his very soul. Branches fell, leaves scattered, and the vibrant green, his decade of dedication, was systematically, brutally dismantled. The air filled with the acrid scent of crushed foliage and sawdust. Each snap, each tear, felt like a personal assault. He could hear the chipper devouring what was left, turning beauty into mulch. He couldn't tear his eyes away. It was a massacre. Within an hour, where a lush, living wall once stood, there was now only a gaping, raw scar of exposed soil and the skeletal remains of trellises, soon to be hauled away. The common area, once shielded by his glorious green, was now starkly visible, bland and uninviting. The crew finished, loaded their equipment, and drove away, leaving behind a profound emptiness. Ethan stood there amidst the debris, the silence, now deafening. He looked at the barren stretch, then at Brenda, who had lowered her teacup and was now watching him, her smile a little wider, a little more triumphant. A cold, hard shift occurred within him. The grief, the helplessness, the anger, they coalesced into a singular, dangerous resolve. He looked back at the empty space, at the raw earth, then up at the indifferent sky. He didn't just see a missing fence. He saw an opportunity. Brenda wanted order, rules, an approved aesthetic. He would give her an aesthetic that was undeniably approved, utterly permanent, and completely, terrifyingly his own. He would build something so unyielding, so uncompromising, that not even her relentless HOA power could touch it. He would build a fortress. And this time, it wouldn't be green. It would be gray. The silence after the crew left was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of suburban life that now seemed to mock Ethan's profound stillness. He stood in his backyard, surveying the devastation. The air still carried the faint, sweet and sour scent of cut jasmine and crushed ivy, a ghost of what had been. His hands, still clenched, slowly relaxed, his fingers tingling with the aftershock of impotent rage. He looked up, and there, framed perfectly by the now empty space where his fence had been, was Brenda Albright, sipping her tea, her gaze a laser beam of triumphant satisfaction. That's when the switch flipped. The raw grief and anger didn't dissipate. They transmuted. It wasn't about the fence anymore. It was about principle. It was about a decade of his life, his effort, his small piece of paradise, unilaterally annihilated by a woman's capricious will. Brenda wanted order? Fine. He would give her order. An order so absolute, so uncompromising, that it would make her meticulously manicured world feel small and insignificant. The next few days were a blur of research. Ethan, usually content with gardening catalogs and obscure botanical texts, immersed himself in local zoning laws, building codes, and, most importantly, the labyrinthine depths of the Cypress Creek Estates CC&Rs. He read every line, every subsection, every amendment, searching for loopholes, for forgotten clauses, for anything Brenda might have overlooked in her zeal for absolute control. He found it. Not a loophole, not an oversight, but a glaring omission, a beautiful, devastating silence. Article 4, Section 2B, indeed stipulated, no permanent structures or plantings that obscure the view of the common areas without explicit, current board approval. But what about a wall? Not a fence, but a freestanding, self-supporting architectural element? The CC&Rs were strangely silent on the matter of solid, opaque walls constructed entirely within one's own property lines, provided they adhered to general building codes for height and setbacks, which were governed by the county, not the HOA. And there was no mention of materials: brick, stone, wood, concrete. As long as it wasn't a fence or planting, as defined, it fell into a gray area Brenda had clearly neglected to regulate. A dangerous thrill coursed through Ethan. He spent evenings poring over architectural plans, calculating load-bearing requirements, researching specialized contractors. He knew exactly what he wanted, something that would stand in stark contrast to the manicured lawns and pastel houses, something that would scream permanence. Brenda, meanwhile, seemed to bask in her victory. Ethan noticed her taking longer walks, often pausing near his property line, her eyes scanning the newly opened common area. He'd catch her subtle smiles, the almost imperceptible tilt of her head as if savoring the pristine emptiness. He said nothing. He simply nodded, a quiet, almost serene expression on his face that, had she known him better, would have been far more alarming than any outburst. 2 weeks after the Green Fence Massacre, a different kind of truck rumbled down Willow Creek Drive. Not a landscaper's truck, but a heavy-duty flatbed laden with bags of cement, aggregates, and rebar. Following, it was a smaller pickup carrying a cement mixer. The crew that emerged this time was different, too. Burly men in hard hats and work boots, their faces grimly focused. Ethan met them in his backyard, a rolled-up blueprint in hand. "Right," he said, pointing to the property line. "We're going." Exactly 7 feet back from the original fence line, entirely within my property. 8 feet high. Solid concrete. The foreman, a weathered man named Gus, squinted at the plans. 8 feet, you say? That's a serious wall, son. Gonna need a deep foundation. As deep as you can make it, Ethan replied, a steely glint in his eyes. And I want it perfectly smooth, no textures, just a monolithic, unblemished surface. Gus shrugged. Your money will get it done. Construction began the next morning. The pneumatic drill hammered the still damp earth, shaking the very foundations of the suburban tranquility. The air filled with the dust of digging and the grinding whir of the cement mixer. Brenda, predictably, was out on her lawn. Her teacup seemed to freeze mid-air. Her triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered indignation. Ethan made it a point to be visible. He wasn't confrontational, just present. He'd bring coffee to the crew, discuss angles and curing times, always with his back to Brenda, never acknowledging her presence directly. He knew she was watching, steaming, probably already dialing the HOA office. The first notice arrived by courier later that day. Subject: immediate cessation of work, unauthorized construction, violation of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. CC&Rs, Article 4, Section 2C. Exterior modifications. Dear Mr. Thorne, it has come to the immediate attention of the Cypress Creek Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors that you have commenced construction of an unapproved solid wall structure on your property, 14 Willow Creek Drive. This constitutes an exterior modification requiring prior written architectural review and approval, which you have not obtained. You are hereby requested to cease all construction activities immediately. Failure to comply will result in a daily fine of $100 and legal action to enforce the CC&Rs. Sincerely, Brenda Albright, President, Cypress Creek Estates, HOA Board. Ethan read the letter, a slow smile spreading across his face. He'd anticipated this. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Davies, who had a reputation for cutting through bureaucratic red tape like a hot knife through butter. They're trying to hit me with Article 4, Section 2C, exterior modifications, Ethan explained. But I checked Sarah. That article specifically refers to modifications to the exterior of the dwelling or attached structures. A freestanding wall entirely within my property line isn't an attached structure. And it's not a fence because they specifically defined fences as vegetation barriers in their previous notices. Sarah chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. Clever, Ethan. Very clever. They boxed themselves in when they categorized your ivy. So, what exactly is this wall, legally speaking? It's an architectural garden element, Ethan deadpanned. Or perhaps a privacy screen. A very, very substantial privacy screen. I like it, Sarah said. Send me the CC&Rs, your original approval for the green fence and all their subsequent violation notices. I'll draft a response that'll make her head spin. And do not stop construction. We want to demonstrate intent. The concrete wall began to rise. Day by day, foot by foot, the imposing gray structure solidified. Gus's crew worked diligently, pouring section after section, leveling, smoothing, creating a perfectly seamless, utterly featureless barrier. It was stark, brutalist, and exactly what Ethan envisioned. It was the antithesis of the soft, yielding green that had once stood there. Brenda's escalating fury was palpable, even from a distance. Ethan saw her stomping across her lawn, talking animatedly on her phone, gesturing wildly towards his burgeoning wall. Neighbors started to murmur. Some whispered disapproval, others a grudging admiration for Ethan's defiance. The cul-de-sac, once a picture of placid suburban conformity, now thrummed with unspoken tension. Another, even more furious letter arrived, this one threatening immediate injunctions and a lien on his property. Ethan forwarded it to Sarah, who merely responded with a single emoji. Then came the day the wall reached its full, imposing 8-foot height. The last section was poured, smoothed, and left to cure. It stood there, a formidable, unyielding sentinel, casting a long, unblinking shadow over Brenda's meticulously kept flower beds. It was so perfectly uniform, so devoid of any aesthetic flourishes, that it defied any easy categorization. It was just there. A solid, undeniable statement. That afternoon, Ethan sat on his back porch, a different kind of coffee in his hand, iced, a quiet celebration. He watched as Brenda, unable to contain herself any longer, marched across her lawn, her face a mask of scarlet fury. She stopped directly at the edge of her property, staring up at the impassive concrete monolith. Her jaw worked, her eyes narrowed. Brenda Albright stood before the monolithic gray wall, her face contorted in a mask of incandescent fury. The setting sun, now a malevolent orange, cast the wall's shadow long and accusatory over her meticulously manicured hydrangeas. Ethan's calm, almost dismissive demeanor had been the final spark. He just stood there leaning against his brutalist statement, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Brenda spluttered, words failing her. The wall wasn't just an eyesore, it was an affront. It was a tangible, 8-foot-high middle finger to her authority, her vision, her very existence in Cypress Creek Estates. This is an abomination, Mr. Thorne, she finally managed, her voice a strained hiss. You think you're clever, don't you? With your architectural garden element? This is a direct violation of community standards, a blight on our beautiful neighborhood. Ethan pushed off the wall, walking slowly towards the property line, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. Community standards, Brenda? Like tearing down a decade-old approved green fence because you decided it was an unauthorized landscape barrier? Or are we talking about the community standards that dictate the precise shade of taupe for mailboxes? He paused, letting his words hang in the still evening air. Funny. I don't recall any standard regarding solid concrete, 8-foot-high, county code-compliant privacy walls. Brenda's jaw worked furiously. You'll pay for this, Thorne. I will convene an emergency board meeting. We will amend the CC&Rs. We will have this monstrosity torn down, brick by brick, if necessary. Concrete by concrete, you mean, Ethan corrected mildly. And good luck with those amendments. I hear retroactive enforcement is a sticky legal wicket. My lawyer, Sarah Davies, is quite adept at navigating sticky legal wickets, among other things. He gave her a polite, almost pitying nod, then turned and walked back into his house, leaving Brenda alone, fuming, dwarfed by the imposing gray wall. The next few days were a tense standoff. Brenda, true to her word, did convene an emergency HOA meeting. Ethan received the notice, embellished with stark red lettering and an urgent tone. He didn't bother attending. Instead, he spent his evenings installing subtle, upward-facing LED lights along the base of his new wall, casting an ethereal, almost eerie glow upwards, highlighting its unyielding texture against the night sky. He also ordered a very large, extremely loud wind chime shaped like a flock of abstract metal birds, intending to hang it from his largest oak tree, just within earshot of Brenda's patio. The phone call from Sarah Davies came the morning after, the emergency meeting. Well, that was predictable, Sarah said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Brenda tried to ram through an immediate amendment, specifically targeting non-vegetative privacy structures exceeding 6 feet in height. But I preemptively sent them a rather strongly worded letter, citing their previous definition of fence and the county's building codes, pointed out that they'd be attempting to impose arbitrary restrictions on legally constructed permitted structures, which could open them up to a rather nasty lawsuit. And Ethan prompted, a smile tugging at his lips. And it seems Mr. Henderson, the retired accountant, actually found his spine for once. He brought up the potential legal fees, the precedent it would set, and the fact that an emergency meeting couldn't legally amend CC&Rs without proper notice and a community-wide vote. The motion was tabled. For now. For now. Yes, Brenda's. Not giving up. She's planning a full community-wide vote on the amendment. She's probably already canvassing the neighborhood, spinning her narrative. Let her, Ethan said, looking out at his gleaming minimalist wall. Let her spin. Brenda's campaign was indeed in full swing. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, detailing the threat to Cypress Creek's aesthetic. Emails from the HOA account, undoubtedly, drafted by Brenda, painted Ethan's wall as a symbol of defiance, a rogue element that jeopardized property values and community harmony. She scheduled town hall-style meetings where she stood at a podium, a meticulously photoshopped image of Ethan's wall, stark and menacing, projected behind her. She spoke of preserving our way of life, of protecting our investments, of the slippery slope towards unregulated individualism. Ethan, meanwhile, took a different approach. He baked cookies, lots of them. Chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, peanut butter. He printed out copies of the relevant CC&Rs, highlighted the sections on vegetation barriers and exterior modifications, and attached them to small, neatly packaged bags of cookies. He walked the neighborhood, knocking on doors. Not to campaign, but to deliver his baked goods. Just thought you might enjoy these, he'd say with a friendly smile. And if you're ever curious about the Great Wall debate, I've attached some light reading. Most neighbors were initially wary, accustomed to Brenda's iron fist. But the cookies were good, and the legal documents, when read without Brenda's dramatic rhetoric, painted a very different picture. They showed Ethan hadn't just built a wall, he'd built it legally, exploiting the very specific definitions Brenda herself had used to justify destroying his green fence. The irony wasn't lost on many. The community vote was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in the clubhouse. The tension in Cypress Creek was palpable. Ethan, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, arrived early, armed with more cookies and a calm, determined air. Brenda, in a crisp navy pantsuit, stood by the entrance, greeting every resident with a tight, practiced smile, her eyes darting nervously towards Ethan. The meeting started with Brenda's impassioned speech, filled with buzzwords, like property values, cohesion, and preventing anarchy. She presented her proposed amendment, which would grant the HOA board sweeping powers to dictate the material, height, and setback of any structure visible from a common area or another property. It was a power grab, pure and simple, designed to make Ethan's wall impossible. Then it was time for questions and comments from the floor. Mr. Henderson, surprisingly, was the first to speak. Brenda, he said, his voice slow and deliberate. I've read the documents Ethan provided, and frankly, this amendment feels less about community standards and more about one specific wall. A wall, I might add, that Mr. Thorne constructed entirely. Within his rights, according to the current CC&Rs you so vigorously upheld when you destroyed his beautiful green fence. A ripple went through the room. Other neighbors, emboldened, started speaking up. Mrs. Rodriguez pointed out that her children actually enjoyed the new wall's smooth surface for bouncing a tennis ball against, something they couldn't do with a flimsy chain link or thorny ivy. Young couples, tired of Brenda's authoritarian rule, questioned the true cost of constant enforcement and potential lawsuits. The narrative Brenda had so carefully constructed began to crumble. When it came time for the vote, the atmosphere was electric. Ethan watched Brenda's face, a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes. The ballots were cast, collected, and tallied by a neutral third party from the next town over, brought in to ensure fairness after Ethan's lawyer insisted. The results were announced. The proposed amendment failed, decisively. A collective sigh of relief, almost imperceptible, swept through the room. Ethan felt a quiet triumph, a deep satisfaction that transcended the simple victory of a wall over a person. It was a victory for reason, for fairness, and for the quiet strength of those who dared to stand against overbearing authority. Brenda, pale and shaking, could only stare at the vote count, her meticulously crafted world shattering around her. As the room began to empty, she turned her gaze to Ethan, her eyes blazing with an almost psychotic rage. He met her gaze, his own calm and unwavering. The wall wasn't coming down. It was staying, a permanent, silent monument to her own folly. And as she watched him walk out, a terrible, sinking realization dawned on her. The wall didn't just block her view, it was a constant, towering reminder that she had lost, and worse, that she had created her own defeat. The air in the Cypress Creek clubhouse had thinned to an almost suffocating tension after the vote. Brenda Albright stood, eyes wide, fixed on the tally sheet. Failed. Decisively. The words echoed in her mind, a death knell to her carefully constructed reign. Her face, usually a picture of controlled severity, was now a canvas of disbelief, then humiliation, and finally, a cold, searing rage. Ethan Thorne, the quiet, plant-obsessed man, had outmaneuvered her, not with bluster, but with quiet defiance, and the very rules she had weaponized. As neighbors filed out, some offering Ethan polite nods of victory, Brenda remained frozen. When she finally turned, her gaze impaled Ethan. It wasn't just anger. It was an almost predatory fury, the kind that promised no quarter. "This isn't over, Thorne," she hissed, her voice low and venomous, barely audible over the shuffling of departing feet. "You think you've won? This wall, this monstrosity, it will be the ruin of you. I promise you that." Ethan simply met her gaze, a calm, almost serene expression on his face. "Brenda," he said, his voice quiet, "I'm just living by the rules, as interpreted by the current HOA, and as determined by the community vote. Isn't that what you always wanted?" He offered a small, polite smile and walked past her, leaving her standing alone amidst the scattered ballots, a defeated queen in her empty kingdom. The following weeks were an unsettling calm before an anticipated storm. Ethan knew Brenda wasn't one to retreat quietly. He received no more official letters from the HOA, no new threats, which ironically made him more wary. This silence was more ominous than any furious missive. He was right to be. Brenda's attacks began insidiously, a campaign of petty harassment designed to chip away at Ethan's peace, to make his victory feel hollow. First, the trash cans. The HOA rules stipulated cans could only be placed at the curb after 6 p.m. the evening before pickup. Ethan, usually punctual, sometimes forgot. Before, it was a gentle reminder from a neighbor. Now, a crisp HOA violation. Notice, complete with a $25 fine, would appear in his mailbox if his cans were out a minute before the allowed time. Brenda herself would sometimes be seen, phone in hand, peering at his driveway from her perfectly manicured lawn, an almost imperceptible stopwatch glinting on her wrist. Then came the lawn. Ethan's yard was always neat, but he preferred a slightly wilder, more natural look for his flower beds, a deliberate contrast to the clipped precision Brenda championed. Suddenly, he started receiving notices for overgrown shrubbery and non-conforming natural landscaping. The fines were minor but persistent, a constant drip designed to annoy. He meticulously trimmed everything to the precise HOA height requirements, and still the notices came. One afternoon, he found a small, almost imperceptible stain on his concrete wall, a splash of what looked like paint. He cleaned it off, but the next day another appeared, and another. It was a tedious, aggravating game, but he refused to engage directly. He simply cleaned, documented, and reported nothing. He knew she wanted a reaction, a confrontation, and he wouldn't give her the satisfaction. The truly audacious move came with the wind chime. The abstract metal birds, ordered weeks ago, had arrived. Ethan, with a mischievous grin, hung the large, resonant chime from a sturdy branch of his ancient oak, precisely positioned so that the afternoon breeze would carry its melodic, if somewhat clangorous, tones directly towards Brenda's back patio. It wasn't offensive per se, just noticeable and constant. The chime had only been up an hour when Brenda appeared at his back gate, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "Mr. Thorne, what in the name of all that is holy is that racket?" Ethan looked up, a picture of innocent surprise. "Oh, the wind chime? Lovely, isn't it? Brings a certain ambiance to the garden. I checked the CCNRs, Brenda. No specific prohibitions against wind chimes. It's not a nuisance under the sound ordinance, as it's below the decibel limit. Just a bit of a musical touch." Brenda's eyes narrowed to slits. "You are deliberately trying to provoke me." "Me? Provoke you?" Ethan asked, feigning shock. "Brenda, after the destruction of my fence and your relentless attempts to remove my perfectly legal wall, I'm just enjoying my backyard. Perhaps you're just not accustomed to the joys of a natural breeze." She stormed off, muttering threats under her breath. But Ethan had won this round. The chime stayed, a constant, gentle reminder of his presence and his subtle defiance. He even started finding excuses to sit on his patio during windy afternoons, sipping lemonade and enjoying the metallic melodies, a small, private smile playing on his lips. Then came the open house. A new young couple, the Millers, were looking at the house next door to Ethan's, which had been on the market for months. Brenda, ever the community gatekeeper, was typically hovering, ready to give them the approved tour and glowing HOA spiel. Ethan watched from his kitchen window as she led them into the backyard. He saw her point to his concrete wall, her mouth moving animatedly, undoubtedly painting it as the epitome of neighborhood blight. The couple looked skeptical, glancing back and forth between Brenda's animated face and the impassive gray monolith. Later, that day, Ethan saw the Millers again, this time standing alone in the backyard, looking at his wall. He decided to seize the opportunity. He walked over to his side of the concrete fortress, a genuinely friendly smile on his face. "Afternoon," he called out. "I'm Ethan Thorne, your potential neighbor." The couple, a young woman with bright, curious eyes and a man with a hesitant smile, turned. "Hi, I'm Jessica, and this is Mark," the woman said. "We're looking at the house." "Lovely place," Ethan offered. "Bit of a shame about the fence, though, isn't it?" He gestured vaguely at the wall. "Originally, there was a beautiful green privacy hedge here, 10 years in the making. But you know, HOA rules. Apparently, it was an unauthorized landscape barrier." He winked, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "So, I put up this instead. County code compliant, completely legal. Can't argue. With concrete, can they?" Jessica let out a small laugh. "Brenda Albright was just telling us how unconventional it was." "Oh, Brenda," Ethan said, a theatrical sigh escaping him. "She has very strong opinions on aesthetics. She prefers things very uniform. Unfortunately for her, I prefer things to be mine." He leaned closer, lowering his voice slightly. "Just a friendly heads up. The HOA here, under Brenda, can be quite enthusiastic about its enforcement. Best to read the CCNRs very, very carefully before you buy, and maybe have a good lawyer on speed dial." He gestured towards the wall. "This, for example, cost me a pretty penny, but it was worth every cent. My own little act of quiet rebellion." Mark looked at the wall, then at Ethan, a slow grin spreading across his face. "So? She made you tear down a green fence and you replaced it with this?" "Precisely," Ethan confirmed, a triumphant gleam in his eye. It's surprisingly resilient and very low maintenance. No watering, no pruning. He patted the concrete. Blocks out a fair bit of noise, too, and prying eyes. He subtly glanced. Towards Brenda's house, Jessica and Mark exchanged a look, then back at Ethan, and then a quick glance over at Brenda's house, which was now suspiciously quiet. The hesitancy on their faces had been replaced by a newfound understanding and a healthy dose of amusement. They understood. They saw the concrete wall not as a blight, but as a battle scar, a defiant stand. The next day, Ethan saw the sold sign go up on the house next door. He smiled. Brenda Albright had just gained 2 new neighbors who were now fully aware of the HOA politics, and perhaps a little more sympathetic to his side of the story. And as he watched Jessica and Mark unload their moving truck, he heard, faintly, from his new neighbor's yard, the distinct resonant sound of his metal bird wind chime dancing in the afternoon breeze. The concrete fortress wasn't just a wall, it was a beacon. The sold sign next door felt like a personal affront to Brenda Albright. Ethan Thorne had not only kept his monstrous wall, but he'd also seemingly charmed the new residents, Jessica and Mark Miller, who now moved in with an air of knowing, amusement. Brenda saw them chatting with Ethan over his new concrete fortress, heard the faint, unwelcome jingle of that infernal wind chime drifting from their shared property line, and a cold, hard knot formed in her stomach. Her campaign to isolate Ethan had backfired spectacularly. Now he had allies. The petty harassment escalated. Brenda became a shadow, a relentless observer. If Ethan left a garden hose coiled imperfectly on his lawn, a violation notice would appear. If his recycling bin wasn't perfectly aligned with the curb, a fine was levied. She installed motion sensor lights on her side of the common area that would blaze to life any time Ethan dared to step into his backyard after dusk, casting his concrete wall in an almost theatrical accusatory glare. Ethan, however, was prepared. He had purchased a comprehensive security camera system, positioning discrete cameras to cover his entire property. Each violation notice, each petty act of surveillance was meticulously documented, time-stamped, and filed away. He even started carrying a small voice-activated recorder in his pocket whenever he was outside, just in case Brenda decided to escalate to verbal confrontations. He was building his own digital fortress, brick by digital brick. One particularly. Sweltering afternoon, Ethan was watering his remaining flower beds, a small, defiant patch of native wildflowers. The new neighbors, Jessica and Mark, were on their patio, enjoying the shade. Brenda, however, was across the common area, ostensibly, tending to her immaculate rose bushes, but her gaze was fixed on Ethan. Suddenly he heard her voice, sharp and saccharine. "Oh, Mr. Thorne," she called out, loud enough for the Millers to hear. "I do hope you're using a low-flow nozzle. We wouldn't want to waste precious community water, would we? Especially with all that runoff you're creating near your wall." Ethan straightened up, a slow smile spreading across his face. He held up his nozzle for all to see. "Actually, Brenda, it's a brand new EPA-approved ultra-low-flow model. And as for runoff, my advanced French drain system ensures zero excess water reaches the common area. Perhaps you'd like a demonstration?" He gestured towards the base of his wall, where a subtle, almost invisible grate was now installed. Jessica and Mark exchanged amused glances. Brenda's face tightened. "There's no need for sarcasm, Mr. Thorne, just concern for our shared resources." She turned her back, defeated once more by Ethan's meticulous planning. The next HOA board meeting was not called by Brenda. It was called by Mr. Henderson, the retired accountant, and Mr. Davies, the usually timid neighbor who had recently received an unprecedented $50 fine for excessive rust on his mailbox post. The agenda, a review of recent enforcement actions by the HOA president, specifically regarding the arbitrary and disproportionate application of fines. Ethan didn't attend, but Jessica and Mark did. They reported back to him with wide eyes, describing the meeting as a slow-motion car crash for Brenda. Mr. Henderson had presented a detailed spreadsheet, cross-referencing violation notices with the properties they were issued to. The data was damning. Ethan, and now a handful of other residents who had expressed dissent against Brenda, were receiving fines at an exponentially higher rate than anyone else. Mr. Davies, emboldened, shared his mailbox story, leading to a chorus of similar complaints. "She was absolutely cornered, Ethan," Jessica recounted, buzzing with excitement. She tried to defend it, saying rules are rules, but Mr. Henderson had examples of other houses with far worse violations that had been completely ignored. He even brought up her own slightly too tall ornamental grass. The board, clearly uncomfortable, and sensing a shift in community sentiment, voted to form a Fair Practices Committee to review all recent fines and enforcement procedures. Brenda, for the first time, seemed truly rattled. Her iron grip on the HOA was starting to slip. But Brenda, though wounded, was not broken. She retreated, not to surrender, but to regroup and devise a more elaborate attack. Her next move was so cunning, so utterly devoid of empathy, that it chilled even Ethan. It began with the children. Cypress Creek Estates had a small but cherished community playground adjacent to the common area, not far from Ethan's concrete wall. Children often played there, their laughter echoing through the cul-de-sac. One sunny afternoon, Ethan saw Brenda talking animatedly with a group of mothers at the playground, gesturing towards his wall. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but the mothers looked concerned, their gazes shifting from Brenda to the concrete. A few days later, a notice appeared on the community bulletin board, directly adjacent to the playground. It was an advisory from the HOA board, detailing concerns about safety hazards posed by unapproved, non-conforming structures adjacent to community play areas. It didn't name Ethan's wall directly, but the implication was clear. It spoke of potential climbing hazards, unsupervised play, and even hinted at unforeseen structural weaknesses in the uninspected monolithic barrier. The fear-mongering worked. Slowly, parents started to pull their children away from playing near the wall. Some even glared at Ethan when he was in his backyard. The laughter near the playground, once carefree, now seemed muted, cautious. Brenda had found a new weapon, community fear, specifically the primal fear for children's safety. Ethan felt a cold dread creep in. This was a new low. He knew his wall was structurally sound, built to code, and perfectly safe. But public perception, fueled by Brenda's malicious whispers, was a powerful force. He called Sarah Davies, his lawyer. "She's targeting the kids, Sarah," he explained, his voice tight with anger, "claiming my wall is a safety hazard for the playground." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That's a nasty one, Ethan. Very hard to fight pure emotional appeal with legal facts, especially when children are involved. We can send a cease and desist for defamation, but it's slow, and the damage will be done." "So what do I do?" Ethan asked, frustrated. "You counter-narrative," Sarah advised. "You show, don't just tell. Is there anything you can do to prove, unequivocally, that your wall is not just safe, but perhaps even beneficial to the playground?" Ethan stared out at his concrete wall, then at the nearby playground, now sparsely populated. A thought sparked. It was audacious, expensive, and utterly unexpected. It was a move so bold it would either solidify his position as a community hero or brand him as truly unhinged. He smiled, a dangerous, determined smile. Brenda wanted a safety hazard? He'd give her something else entirely. He'd give the children of Cypress Creek Estates something they'd never forget. He'd turn his fortress into a canvas. The idea, audacious and seemingly reckless, took root in Ethan's mind like a stubborn weed. Brenda wanted to paint his wall as a danger to children. He would transform it into a beacon of joy. He called Sarah Davies again, outlining his plan. There was a pause on the other end, then Sarah's dry chuckle. "Ethan, "You are truly something else," she said. "A community art project? On your wall? It's brilliant." It counters her narrative, creates positive engagement, and makes her look like a spoilsport. Legally, as long as it's within your property, and doesn't violate any actual codes regarding public display or obscenity, she has no leg to stand on. "And the kids?" Ethan asked, a genuine excitement building in his voice. "I want them involved. Make it their wall." "Even better," Sarah affirmed. "Get parent volunteers, make it a documented community event. We'll send out notices that frame it as a beautification initiative for the playground area. It will be hard for her to object to children painting a mural without looking like the Grinch." Ethan moved with a quiet, efficient determination that had become his trademark. He reached out to Jessica and Mark, who immediately offered their enthusiastic support. Jessica, a former art teacher, was thrilled by the idea of a community mural. Together, they drafted a proposal emphasizing themes of nature, friendship, and the vibrant spirit of Cypress Creek. They secured donations of child-safe, weather-resistant paints and brushes from a local art supply store, excited by the publicity. The next step was informing the community. Ethan, with Jessica's help, put together a brightly colored flyer inviting all children, with parental supervision, to participate in the Cypress Creek Community Mural Project on his wall, designed to bring art and joy to the playground area. They highlighted that the wall provided a perfect, durable surface for a permanent, collaborative artwork. They even scheduled a small unveiling picnic for the day the mural would be completed. Brenda, predictably, saw red. She caught Ethan pinning a flyer to the community bulletin board. "Mr. Thorne, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice tight with disbelief. "You cannot possibly be serious. A mural? On that thing? It will be an eyesore, a desecration." "On the contrary, Brenda," Ethan replied calmly, "it will be a celebration of community and art. I've consulted with local artists, checked all relevant codes, and ensured all materials are safe and non-toxic. It's a privately funded, community-engaging project on my private property. I believe the CCNRs are silent on the matter of artistic expression, especially when it beautifies an area adjacent to a playground." He watched her face, the familiar mask of fury cracking with a new emotion, utter bewilderment. She couldn't understand. She had defined the wall as a threat, a blank canvas of defiance. Now he was turning it into something warm, inviting, undeniably positive. How could she fight that? The day of the mural project dawned bright and clear, filled with an excited buzz. Children, armed with paintbrushes and chaperoned by laughing parents, descended upon Ethan's backyard. Jessica had sketched out a basic outline, a winding river, trees, friendly animals, but the true magic was in the details, left to the imaginations of the young artists. The air filled with the scent of paint, the chatter of children, and the joyful squeals of creation. Ethan walked among them, helping a child reach a high spot, offering encouragement, his heart swelling, with a warmth he hadn't felt since before Brenda's arrival. Mark helped set up a refreshment stand, handing out juice boxes and snacks. Even Mr. Henderson and Mr. Davies showed up, not to paint, but to quietly observe, their smiles growing wider as the wall transformed. Brenda, of course, was there. She stood on her lawn, initially rigid with disapproval, watching the vibrant chaos unfold. She had called the county, the city, anyone she could think of, but Ethan had covered his bases. No zoning violations, no noise ordinances breached, no public safety concerns that couldn't be immediately debunked by the sight of supervised children painting. Her calls had been met with polite but firm dismissal. The wall, by all accounts, was now a legitimate canvas. As the day progressed, the drab gray monolith bloomed into a riot of color. A blue river snaked across its base, surrounded by green trees with purple and yellow leaves. Friendly lions and grinning giraffes emerged from the concrete. One little girl, with intense concentration, painted a tiny, bright red ladybug on a leaf. Another boy, clearly a fan of superheroes, added a small flying figure in the corner. The wall, once a symbol of defiance, was now a vibrant testament to imagination and community. Parents, initially hesitant, became increasingly enthusiastic. They took photos, shared stories, and laughed together. The fear Brenda had sown about the safety hazard dissipated, replaced by a sense of shared accomplishment and pride. By late afternoon, the mural was complete, a sprawling, joyous masterpiece created by dozens of small hands. The unveiling picnic began. Ethan, Jessica, and Mark stood before the wall, Jessica now beaming. "This isn't just paint on concrete," Jessica announced to the assembled crowd. "This is the spirit of Cypress Creek, brought to life by our incredible children. It's a reminder that beauty can be found in unexpected places, and that creativity can overcome, well, anything." She cast a subtle glance towards Brenda, who still stood rigidly on her lawn. Ethan stepped forward, a lump forming in his throat. "I want to thank every single child, every parent, and every volunteer who made this happen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This wall used to be a point of contention, but now it's a bridge built by imagination, for our community." "Thank you." Children cheered. Parents applauded. The wind chime, catching a gentle breeze, added a soft, metallic melody to the celebration. The scene was utterly, undeniably heartwarming. Brenda, watching from her distant lawn, could no longer maintain her stoic facade. Her face, which had been a mask of stone, began to crumple. The joy, the laughter, the sheer undeniable success of Ethan's project was a poison to her meticulously ordered world. It wasn't just that she couldn't stop it, it was that everyone was loving it. Her power, her authority, her carefully constructed image were not just challenged. They were being actively, joyously dismantled before her very eyes. As Ethan surveyed the colorful wall, sparkling under the golden hour sun, he noticed a young boy, no older than 6, pointing at a small green ivy vine that Jessica had cleverly incorporated into the painted riverbank. "Look, Dad," the boy exclaimed. "It's a little green fence." Ethan smiled. Brenda had destroyed his green fence, but in doing so, she had inadvertently given him the opportunity to build something far more resilient, far more impactful, and ultimately far more beautiful. She had built his concrete fortress, and he, in turn, had transformed it into a masterpiece that celebrated the very life and vibrancy she had sought to suppress. And for Brenda, standing alone on her perfect lawn, watching the joyous scene, the irony was a crushing, inescapable weight.